Welcome to another episode of our Mosaic World Film Series. We are trying to look at the world through the stories told by different cultures and how we understand and appreciate each other by hearing their stories, and in this case, watching their stories. And today we are going to talk about a very interesting movie from China. It's called To Live. And I'm so glad I have my friend Jin here, who is actually an expert in movies. But more importantly, she comes from mainland China, so she knows what we are talking about. So when you watch this movie, To Live, it is a classic by a very famous director. His name, I don't want to mess up, but director
Zhang Yimou.
Zhang Yimou. Okay. And I have the first movie I watched, his movie I watched was, I think, Raise the Red Lantern, which was like a poetry. Like, I loved it, the way, and hopefully we'll talk about that in one of the episodes. And then Red Sorghum is his movie. Great director. So this was particularly touching. Apart from the fact that it's a movie, but it is also a very interesting introduction to the Chinese history in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s as the story unfolds. Essentially, it is the story, I would say, of a family, even though the protagonist is a man named Fugui, who he's a protagonist, the central character. But it is the family, the whole of that family's journey to live, and in other words, to survive through this unfolding political drama that is happening in China, and eventually they find redemption and also forgiveness of some of these themes will be played out. But as an outsider watching that movie, I got most of it, but what happened in China in the 40s and 50s and the 60s is very important for us to understand. It gives a completely different lens. So the way you would watch that movie, Jin, would be very different from me or any of our listeners are watching. So how did you watch that movie, knowing the historical and cultural background of China firsthand? So explain that movie to me. Yeah.
Right. So for me, we cannot the viewer, I would say, cannot look and watch this film without having a little bit understanding of the Chinese history during 40s, 50s, and 60s, because those are the poignant times where the whole country reorganized itself and underwent a dramatic transformation.
So when the story starts, it's a pre-communist.
Right,
China,
pre-communist
right?
China.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, where the is like a combination of feudalistic and capitalistic or emergent capitalistic kind of environment.
Yeah.
A lot of the old customs, way of thinkings are still linger in the 40s, and the country is going through a period of confusion in a way, in terms of its structure, in terms of its governmental ruling. And so what I would like to touch on the point in the 40s in that film is this particular idea of credit, where we see Fu Gui initially he gambled away his whole inheritance and his whole family's wealth, and losing to this other character called Long Er. So this idea of credit, when there is a scene where Fu Gui's dad has learned that his son has lost everything, and he does not want to not pay back this debt. So when we see this big paper, a lot of check mark, like a lot of stamps on it, a lot of writing on it, that piece of paper is a representation, a physical representation of this family's reputation, of this family's social status, social standing, and basically everything, their life is in this paper. And it's very transparent in the local community. And
so that was very common to have that kind of a credit system.
Right.
That was their computer and all this, data that we collect, right? That stood out in that movie, and they're intentionally showing a lot of shots of that, and inside and outside too.
You see the generational pass down of wealth in this family, and it's very transparent. In contrast with our modern day society, where we use credit card, right? We go out, we spend, we swipe the card. People not knowing who they're dealing with. In that sense, we don't know this person's background. We don't know how much he or she has, and it's not as transparent as in what is showed in the movie. So it's totally different. A modern day person living in the States, they may lost everything. They may have gone through bankruptcy, but if we don't live in the same space, we don't know each other for generation. We don't know that. So people can put on a facade or a cover makeup. But then in this movie, what we see is a completely different social construct here. Everything is transparent in terms of your wealth, in terms of your reputation, and also if you lost it, if you have owned a great amount of debt, you cannot die basically peacefully. That's why we see Fugui's father. He's very saddened by his son, what his son did, and but in spite of all that, he does not want this debt be passed down. He wants to finish it. Before he died, he doesn't want his son to inherit his debt. So we see this idea of generational continuation passed down from son to son to son to son, or from father to son to the son's offspring.
Which is a very important continuing theme in many of the Eastern culture, right? Like I'm coming from India, I can relate to that too. To me, that scene also kind of was a precursor of what was just about to happen, because right after comes the revolution, right? The next big scene is the Liberation Army and
nationalist versus communist.
So that happens, and complete change of a landscape. Here we are, the central character is recruited for the nationalist army to do a shadow puppetry, but then he ends up with the Liberation Army, and eventually that helps him. And it's the funny story about this, probably we can talk about it after, is that even though the things that is happening to him is apparently bad, it turns out to be very good.
It's a blessing.
It's a blessing, hidden blessing in the end, including that beginning scene where he loses everything, but at the end we realizes that the reason he survived is because he lost everything. But now, so in the second chapter we see the revolution happens and the communist China emerges. So walk us through that period of the film, as a reference, but what's happening in China and in the film that way.
So in the 50s, where there's this big political campaign or economic/political campaign. It's called Great Leap Forward, where I think the leader of mainland China are trying to propagate the economy, and they're trying to push. The slogan at the time is to chase up and to win over the USA and UK in terms of production. They try to boost the economy, but the thing is, the process is rather painful, because we see in the movie that every single family needs to need to sacrifice their pans, their bowl, everything that is made of metal.
That's right. Anything metal goes into this furnace, and steel making process. That was a big okay.
That's a big thing because they want to chase up with the Western world in terms of economy, and they also want to another theme that it ties to liberate Taiwan. To liberate Taiwan in their perspective.
So Taiwan is where the nationalists kind of escaped.
Yeah, they escaped to Taiwan. But Taiwan before that was like a colony for Japan. The Japanese invade and then they colonize Taiwan, and then nationalists, in order to escape communists, they escape to Taiwan. So you have this two political struggle and
so the Great Leap Forward and this steel making and all that very clearly depicted and even talked about in the movie was also a part of liberating Taiwan and advanced the Chinese, not empire, the communism, the idea.
The idea communist heaven.
And to, especially in contrast to the Western world, the USA and the UK. That's very, actually a major chunk of the film is being played out in that scene, and the characters are involved. All our center characters and the families involved in that too. But then comes this unexpected turn, which was confusing for me, as an outsider, not really knowing, because the characters who we thought were very loyal communists, there are some of the fake communists, as we can see. Even our central character is a fake communist. He's trying to survive, right? I mean, he can be communist, he can be anything depending on what you wanted him to be, because to me that's the story. The struggle of people to adapt to the situation, just to live or just to survive. But then there are some characters who are keen on their ideology, and for example, that village leader who is a very loyal communist, even though I don't necessarily agree with his ideology as an outsider, but I felt some kind of kinship with him, because he believes he's loyal to what he thinks is right, which is communism. But then in the next section of the movie, I think which happens in the 60s, suddenly he becomes a villain. So does many other people who are even then I believe to be good communists, and this new generation comes in, and then, they become traitors. And what is happening in that era? What is that?
So to go back a little bit, in the 50s, where we have the Great Leap Forward, right? And the goal is to catch up with the production. So here comes the problem that at the time, mainland China did not have such a great production power yet. And so in order to meet the slogan that the leader has proposed, the people sort of overjoyed, and they think they live in such a great socialistic heaven, a great communist heaven. They think they have abundance, but in actuality they don't. So we see the discrepancy between the statistics at the time provided by the local officials, because in order to meet the government's production goal, they have to fake some of the numbers. So here comes the problem. When you fake a number, when you don't have it, there will be a problem. And then basically a lie after lie after lie after lie, you pile up and then collapse. So in the form of a natural disaster happen, they call Great Chinese Famine I think range between 1960s to 1963, where a lot of people, millions of people died because of hunger. And so with that said, the government sort of trying to evaded the whole situation. And then there's another political campaign come in the 60s, which is called the Cultural Revolution. A lot of the audience probably are familiar with the term, the Cultural Revolution, where this is a period of, again, yet another confusion in terms of politics. So this is where you see the people who you think is your friend, who you think is good, a good communist, all of a sudden become bad without much explanation. Why? Just because of certain thing they say, they kind of pick it up and they segmented what you have said before and then turn you to an enemy.
Wow. So that might have left many audience confused. I mean, who are not really introduced or well versed with the Chinese history. I was thinking to be, it's the evolution of communism into whatever we have in China right now. I don't think China is practicing communism, textbook communism at least. There is a hybrid of capitalism or communism, whatever is happening there. But it is more than that, right? Like, it is that transition is something else. Like, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's confusing for Chinese as well as the outsider. So people are going through a period of not knowing what they're doing. They can't trust anybody. I think in a way it's almost equivalent to what happened in Soviet Russia. It's Great Purge, but it's a Chinese version of it.
Wow. Yeah. No, this is very helpful for us to understand that movie. And this is, thank you. Now, come to the movie itself. And one other thing I read about that movie is that it comes from a novel, right? Like it's a written novel before it was a movie. And I heard the novel was much darker than, was that it?
Yes, yes, the novel is much darker.
Yeah, and another thing I heard about, again, I don't know how much of it is true, but the visuals of shadow puppetry is an important narrative tool in that movie, the shadow puppetry. And I would like to know what is the relevance of it is in Chinese culture and also in the movie. And it was actually not in the novel, but the director added that to the movie. And I think it's very significant in the movie, shadow puppetry. So what was the cultural relevance of it and also the cinematic, as a cinematic tool in storytelling?
Yeah, so the shadow puppetry is a very local, very communal art form used by a lot of commoners the Chinese commoners back then. Especially when we see in the beginning in the 40s, where it's sort of like a local entertainment. If nowadays it's movie, right? We go to the movie theater, we watch a movie. That's a way of we get our entertainment. Back then in 40s, in the local community, especially in the village, and that's a form of entertainment for the local people, for the local commoners, and is not expensive, and it's a very popular format of people telling stories, all kinds of stories, and provide entertainment, provide not much education, but mainly for entertainment purposes. And it's a very, like I said in beginning, a very, very communal art. It sort of get born out of the people.
Yeah. And I also thought it was used as a sort of a metaphor by the filmmaker in so many sense, because there is a life on both sides of the screen. And then I think just before that liberation happens, the Liberation Army comes and take over, or the Nationalist Army is trying to recruit, draft people, and you see a sword coming and piercing the screen. And both worlds kind of collide in a way. I thought that was very, very interesting. And I also thought the whole story is, in a way, and the title is also about to live, to survive, and people play roles. Right, and in the movie, it's very clear, in Chinese culture, the value of family, and each one plays a role, and even the dynamics between Fu Gui and his wife, and who's a very central character in the movie, and she, despite all this happened, and at some point it almost like she left him, but she comes back because they all play a role. It's not so much about the pursuit of happiness from the Western understanding or the individualistic, but you all have a role. This is a drama, right? Like you just play your role. Does that make any sense? Or that's what I got from the shadow puppetry, not knowing the cultural background.
Yeah, but it's definitely a way of pushing the storyline forward. And then another interesting thing, since you mentioned shadow puppetry here, it's very interesting how people interpret this art form. So when you see the knife slice through the screen, and then before communists coming, this is just a form of entertainment. But then you would think that with communists coming in, this form will be obsolete. But that's not what happens. And when the communists came, there's another interpretation of this art form. It is for the people. So here you have a reinterpretation of an art form so that this reinterpretation actually ensures the survival of this art form. Yeah, so it's the same thing with people, with individual, where we see Fu Gui, right? This person has gone through so many things through a probably 30, 40 year span, and his identity keep changing. The interpretation of his identity kept changing. Then this changing of interpretation ensures his survival and his family's survival.
Which is the central theme of the movie, as we discussed, and then also what makes the story universal, right? Like, so it's not just the story of China at that point. Everybody in every culture, as humanity, is a struggle for survival, right? And so that's where, to me, that story really connected a chord with me, even though I'm not from that culture. You also mentioned the name of Fu Gui. The title, the central character has a meaning, which is interesting. What were you thinking about that?
Fu Gui in Chinese basically means richness, and it has a connotation of prosperity. So basically, I think when Fu Gui's parents gave him this name, I think they have in mind that their son is going to have a golden spoon in his life. He's gonna have a great wealth if he inherit the whole family wealth. He's gonna have great wealth passing down to his offsprings. But in the movie, we see a very ironic twist where he lost all his material possession because of his gambling. I don't want to give too much of plot away, but he likes to gamble. He lost everything to this character. His name is Long Er. And later, he had a repentant turn. In the way that he has gone through repentance process, and he left his past behind. He completely gave up gambling, and he started to sell things. He started to work with his hands. He started doing shadow puppetry. The thing that he used to entertain himself becomes a mean for him to earn a living. And so there's a dramatic turn. If he did not lose all his material possession, later he will be the person that die.
It's funny. That twist was in the beginning itself, right? Like the guy who ended up becoming rich through the gambling lost the gamble of life, right? Like, in the game of life, he lost, whereas this guy won. Again, not to give up too much, but that's in the beginning itself. But that was an interesting setup, and that's actually the thematic way the movie unfolds too, right? Like, in a way, in a biblical sense, the rich becomes the poor, and the first becomes the last, and the last becomes the first. And that twist is very, very interesting and entertaining to an extent, even through the pain they are going through. Now, there are so many elements we can talk about in this movie, but, this being, many reviewers can talk. But I am particularly interested in the cultural aspect and also the religious aspect, which we don't normally talk a lot about when we talk about movies, particularly world cinema. Now, I am curious, Jin, some of the depiction of religion and God, the Chinese understanding of God. As an outsider, I always think of Chinese culture as shaped by Confucius and a little bit of Daoist concept, and the Buddhism. We exported Buddhism from India to all that part that eventually happened. So it's a mix of all that, but not a lot of people know that all of this exists intertwined with the ancestral worship, which I think is predominant in the Chinese psyche, right? Like, so there are there are two graveyard scenes, and I don't want to say whose graveyard, then, give the story away. But what do we see there? And, they go and offer this dumpling, and they burn some of the clothes of the dead. So what is some of the belief associated with that?
So I think there's a very a physicality dimension of burning some of the clothes and offering the food for the dead, because in the Chinese psyche they do not want the dead to be hungry. They don't want them to be cold. Sort of when people pass through the threshold of life and death to the other, from life to the other end, is another reality, and there is a very physical aspect of that reality to the Chinese mindset. They think when people passing from life to death, it's like going through another world. To into another world, you need to have some means. The means represented by the dumplings and the clothes, and also sometimes they burn paper coin, like in the shape of a coin. They burn it. They don't want their dead to be poor on the way.
So the belief is that you burn something here at the graveyard or in this world, it will automatically
go to transfer to a different world.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like a banking transaction kind of process. Wow. Okay.
But physical dimension is very crucial. Materialistic. Materialism is very central to the Chinese mindset in a way. That material thing is it needs to be transferred from this world to the next. It will go with you.
So the dead are not really dead, and they also have to survive, right? Everybody has to live, so even the dead have to survive. That's this is a concept even I have seen many people struggling with, and even it took a while for me to understand. We think about China, it's all about communism, and the communists don't obviously believe in God and all that kind of stuff, but the quest for religion or quest for spirituality per se, and the there's a verse in the Bible which says that God has kept eternity in our heart. Whether you're Chinese or Indian or the Western, it doesn't really matter. The quest for eternity is ingrained even in the mind of a communist. So that is something very educational for many people to know. It's just that Chinese people are not all communists and they don't believe in God. But that graveyard sequence to me was interesting. Now, on that note, another thing which really fascinated me, Jin, in that movie is that when communism take over, obviously, the one of the professed theme of communism is to eradicate religion in a way, because it's an opium, right? And even in the middle of that, there are so many scenes in the movie which depict communism itself becoming a religion. Very ritualistic religions to boot, right? Like you see the icon of Chairman Mao and this red book, which is like the Bible. And they very clearly refer to it, not just respectfully, reverentially. And the wedding sequence is very interesting, where the center character's daughter get married to a main Communist Party leader of the local region. And, they pose for a photo and they want to make sure that Chairman Mao's picture is there. And they say, okay, hold the book properly for the photos. It's just like, in my wedding, we carried the Bible in our wedding because, in the religious setting. And so, I remember the photo, hold the Bible properly so that you can, see. And it's the same way, they hold it properly. And then they are actually taking that vow in front of Chairman Mao, even though he's not physically present, it's just in front of his photo. It's almost like a prayer. And I would say it was like a prayer. They almost as if imagine the invisible presence of Chairman Mao there, and they dedicate their life to him or the cause represented by him. And I won't believe that anybody, doesn't matter, anybody tell me, but because it is religious. That is essentially religious, replacing Chairman Mao or the ideology he presented, communism and the version of it, as a fundamental element of spirituality. So talk to me about that religious shift, ancestral, that's a very great introduction. But even communism itself, how does it become a religion with a ritualistic aspect? Yes,
I understand what you mean. I really appreciate your keen observation. This is another point where when we see Chinese culture in its it's like a continuation of culture, where we see one idea replace the other. So in the 40s, again, go back to the idea of credit, where the local the local people sort of they don't really have a communist government at the time, right? So what the rules of the local people is their moral and their moral principles, their tradition, and which go back to centuries before them, and also it's just this idea of culture that is the ruling force in a people, in a community. And then you have 50s when the communists start going in and sort of start to inject all this communist ideology, sort of replacing all the old things, what they describe old tradition, the old four, like Confucius ideology, like the old superstition, the communists trying to rush in and clear out all of that. And so it culminates in the thing that you describe, their marriage. And so they basically, all the old thing died. We reinstall a new thing, which is Chairman Mao, as a replacement of all the cultural tradition and all the cultural not cultural ideal, but the old ideology, the old tradition, and swipe everything away, and we have something new. But in actuality, in essence, it's still a continuation of what happened before. It's just a mean for people to cling on to, so they to cling on, so that they have something they can put their hopes on, so that their life will have a meaning.
Yeah, to me that was very fascinating observation I made. So the communists are not really replacing religion, but they are actually replacing the idols and putting new idols there. Because nobody can replace their inherent quest for religiosity or spirituality from human heart. To me, that was such a lesson learned from that movie. That brings me to my favorite scene in that movie. How that movie dealt with the theme of forgiveness. It was spellbound, and the way the director crafted that scene. So this is what I'm talking about, where the district chief ended up committing something unforgivable to the central character and their family, and it is basically a driving accident. But right from the beginning of the movie, the district chief happened to be the friend of our protagonist and their family. But right from the beginning, the craftiness of the director, he was portraying this district chief. At that time, he was not a district chief; he was just a vagabond, I guess. Like he was just a nobody, but his interest in driving, even though he's not good at driving, he wanted to be a driver.
He dreamed of a car.
Exactly, right? And eventually he ends up, committing this unexpected manslaughter. But the difficulty of forgiving that, I think protagonist kind of forgave, but his wife, what is the name of that actress? Gong Li, and she is very famous in China, right? And most of the director Zhang's films, you can see her. Gong Li, amazing actress, and she won't forgive because, and rightly so, right? Like that's and it in so many ways it is unforgivable. And it comes to this climactic scene. I don't want to give too much away, but the point is that she makes it very clear to the district chief, it is not forgivable because you still owe us a life, or something similar to that. You still owe us a life. Then I am expecting at some point she is going to ask him for their life or something like that. But towards the end of the movie, she will never forgive. But at the last minute, when the district chief himself finds himself in a position where he is going to take his life, and then she opens the door and she is basically asking for that promise, you still owe us a life, and that was such a twist where she's basically asking, and this is not giving the plot away, so we can talk about it, but she is basically asking for his own life. Right, like, because he says his wife committed suicide, but before he takes his life away, suddenly the forgiveness comes, and to me, And I am, I'm looking back at this from a Christian lens, and I'm, obviously I don't have. To me, that is such a religious epicenter of that film. Not the ancestral worship, not the communist ritualistic whatever idols they are creating. To me, that's where I would say found God. To me, it was a God moment of her opening the door and making this unexpected statement. And she says, "You still owe us a life," and that life was not what we thought. So what did you think of that scene? I'm excited that was brilliant. That was a brilliant scene in the movie.
So I think here you're right. That is the most, I think if not one of the most powerful, it is the most powerful scene in the movie. We see how the human relationship play out. It is a very, very, very humane depiction of the difficulty that forgiveness entails, and how hard people have to try to be able to bring forgiveness to a completion, to a very to a positive note, because it can go wrong. Let's be honest. In reality, when somebody did us or do us some wrong, the first reaction is to revenge, right? And then even a lot of times, when the person who does you wrong want to say sorry, a lot of times the person who get hurt would not let go. So you can't really bring the forgiveness to a perfect end. So here we see the mastery of the director. He gave a very realistic depiction of the process of forgiveness and how it can come to a beautiful end. It ended up giving life, releasing the family from their bitterness, releasing the chief of district his guilt, and that they can respectively start their own life. So this process, again, another catastrophe happened in terms of human relationship here.
Yeah, no, to me, that was, like I said, it was an epiphany in so many ways, right? Like, again, I think we have come to a close, and we have taken more time than we expected. But this is such a movie worth discussion, watching and learning and experiencing. Not only from a cultural standpoint, like you said, Jin, at the foundational level, humane level, right? Whether you're Indian or Chinese or American, we are all fundamental human beings. And some of the scenes like this really reflected on that. Any final note on this you wanted to add?
Just one note about forgiveness. I have heard, I can be very wrong, but in our cultural context here, I think I've heard that forgiveness is sort of this idea that in my heart I forgive. For example, somebody does me wrong, I forgive him in my heart. We don't really need this process of reconciliation to happen. And I can just forgive him in my heart. We don't really need to encounter each other in our later life. But sort of my own heart will dictate the result of that forgiveness. So it's sort of that I forgive, my part is released. Whatever happens with the other, it's not my responsibility. But in this film, where we see at the end, that's not so. That's not how forgiveness happens. If you want organic forgiveness to happen, to flower in reality, you need both parties to come into an actual space. In the actual reality, their relationship, their interaction needs to cross. They need to cross their life with each other. So it's sort of, you have a life clash with the other life. You need to have this physical, realistic encounter with the other in order to complete the action of forgiveness. So in the sense that if you only do it in your heart without without interaction with the other, your forgiveness is not the real forgiveness. It's more like appeasement of your own psychological. Yes. So that's the final note that I would like to
I'm glad
mention.
you said that in the culture in which we live, and even in the Christian circle where I mostly hang out, we have a very shallow idea of forgiveness. We just forgive. And sometimes even say that, oh, we forgive not for them but for us. We hold on to the grudges, and the popular psychology plays into it. But man, that scene, and that was a lesson for me, radically changing my own perspective and teaching of forgiveness too. So as much as it's a cultural learning experience, it is fundamentally at the core of humanity. It is an epiphany of what it is that you see God in ordinary walk of life. So To Live is the film, and we will come back to you again with more films on the Mosaic film series. Enjoy these movies and understand each other and appreciate each other.